Meanwhile, the congressional resignations and scandals surrounding Eric Swalwell and Tony Gonzalez has prompted a sort of reckoning in Congress as more members are under renewed scrutiny for accused misdeeds. House Speaker Mike Johnson says Florida Democrat Sheila Sherflis McCormick should be expelled over allegations that she stole $5 million from FEMA disaster funds for personal use. And Speaker Johnson also said he would look into an ongoing House investigation into Florida Republican Corey Mills, who is accused of assault and benefiting from federal contracts while in office. Joining us now is CBS News political director Fin Gomez. Fin, great to be with you. Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're hearing on Capitol Hill right now? Is there a reckoning happening here, and how did it really start?
All right, guys, Dr. John here. So what is happening right now? Senator Ed Markey stood on the Senate floor and said it plainly. The House must impeach, the Senate must remove. Not investigate, not deliberate, remove. He called the president a war-hungry madman who launched a war authorized by no one and declared by no one, and entered every word into the permanent congressional record. He wasn't alone.
I think that's a great question. I think what we are hearing right now from the Hill is that we could be use the term reckoning, that we could be in the early stages of a reckoning on Capitol Hill that really began, if you recall, with that bipartisan push led by Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna and Congressman Thomas Massie from Kentucky, Republican, that bipartisan push to release the Epstein files. And this sort of hits that zeitgeist, of course, that you've seen that really started then. But with Eric Swalwell, this is not just contained to Eric Swalwell. What we're hearing, that there could be more names. You mentioned two names who really are on the radar from both sides.
Multiple senators echoed the call the same day, and all of it erupted within 24 hours of a letter signed by 47 members of Congress, including 16 Republicans, demanding resignation. This isn't a fringe position anymore. It's senators, on the record, using words that leave no room for ambiguity. The velocity of this escalation is unlike anything we have witnessed in the modern political era.
Of two lawmakers who have been facing some extra scrutiny, additional scrutiny, because of the allegations against them. And you could see, and we are hearing that there will be votes potentially where they could face expulsion as well. But it is a different tenor that we're hearing, coming from the Hill. There does seem to be some more movement here from more staff and more advisors speaking out against some of these allegations against federal lawmakers.
One of the lawmakers that we brought up just moments ago, Representative Tony Gonzalez, also resigned after being accused of having a relationship with a staffer who later committed suicide. We and many other networks reported extensively on this story for weeks. So can you talk to us about why he's stepping down now, today?
The story is moving so fast that the traditional news cycle, with its 24-hour churn, is struggling to keep pace. The full picture of what is actually unfolding within the corridors of power on Capitol Hill is not reaching the public in its complete interconnected form, but that is precisely what we are here to remedy. You are about to receive the comprehensive, unvarnished account of a presidency that is facing a simultaneous assault from the legislative branch on multiple constitutional fronts.
And this is very similar from the other side, right? And we're seeing this with the allegations against Eric Swalwell, bill with Tony Gonzalez, something that, as you mentioned, has played out for months. We have done some reporting on that, some exclusive reporting on that as well. But why now? Why was there this hesitation initially to remove him? And that's because of the small margin, that really narrow margin the Republicans currently have on the House side. Now, if they removed Gonzalez, that's one less vote and makes that margin about 4 even smaller. So that is why there was that hesitancy from Republican leadership to make that change with Gonzalez. But now, because this crescendo has really gotten louder, and because of Swalwell, and the expectation of some expulsion votes, I think the decision was made by Gonzalez and the push from the Republican leadership team to do this now because he likely would be facing expulsion later in the week, regardless of how this played out.
Let us pull apart the threads of this rapidly unraveling tapestry, because there are several distinct but deeply interconnected strands running through this story. The first thread is the Ed Markey statement itself, the raw, unfiltered demand for removal from a senator who understands that his words carry the weight of the institution he serves. The second thread is the bipartisan resignation letter, 47 signatures, 31 Democrats and 16 Republicans. That specific number and the partisan composition it reveals tells us something profoundly important about where the fracture lines within the Republican coalition are beginning to widen into visible cracks. The third thread is the broader context that provides the fuel for this fire. The ceasefire that is fraying at the edges, the war powers resolutions that keep forcing senators to go on the record, the Republican committee chairmen who have issued stark public warnings about the consequences of stonewalling congressional oversight, the coverage on conservative media outlets that has begun to use language like war crimes in connection with the administration's rhetoric. All of these elements are converging. They are tributaries feeding a single fast-moving river. And that river is carrying the American political system toward a destination that feels less like a routine political dispute and more like a constitutional crisis unfolding in slow motion. The reason this moment carries a weight that previous flare-ups have lacked is not simply the volume of the noise. It is the quality of the individuals who are making it. When a United States senator calls for removal, it is categorically and fundamentally different from a member of the House introducing articles of impeachment. The House impeaches. That is the indictment. The Senate removes. That is the conviction and the execution of the sentence. Senator Markey is not calling for a preliminary step. He is calling for the final, irrevocable outcome. He is standing on the floor of the chamber that holds the sole power to render that verdict, and he is demanding that his colleagues exercise that power. He is saying that the evidence is already in, the case is already made, and the time for deliberation has passed. The only remaining task is the vote. That is an extraordinary assertion to make publicly, particularly with a midterm election still looming on the horizon and the political calculations of every member of that chamber in a state of constant flux. Now we must direct our focus to those 16 Republicans because the significance of their inclusion on that resignation letter is being drastically underreported in the broader media narrative. 16 Republican members of the United States Congress affixed their signatures to a document that explicitly requests the resignation of the president of their own party. Pause and let the gravity of that decision settle in. Consider the personal and political calculus required to take such a step. This is not a private expression of frustration during a phone call with a trusted colleague. This is not a carefully worded statement expressing concern about a specific policy while reaffirming overall support for the administration. This is a public, documented, and irrevocable act of repudiation. By signing that letter, these 16 individuals have attached their names, their political identities, and their electoral futures to the proposition that Donald Trump should no longer be president. They have done so with the full knowledge that the president's political base remains intensely active, deeply loyal, and possessed of a formidable capacity for retribution. They understand that this signature could invite a well-funded primary challenger. They understand that it could unleash a torrent of abuse on social media. They understand that it could make their remaining time in office a grueling exercise in political survival. And yet, 16 of them looked at the landscape. The unauthorized war, the stalled ceasefire, the surging fuel prices, the constitutional stonewalling, and concluded that the cost of silence was now greater than the cost of speaking out. That is not a trivial data point. That is a significant, concrete, and documented indicator of where the Republican Party's internal breaking points actually reside. And the timing of this fracture is particularly noteworthy. This is not a late-term calculation by members who are retiring and have nothing left to lose. These are active legislators making a rational assessment of their own political viability in real time. Let us drill down into the substantive legal and constitutional argument that Senator Markey and his allies are advancing, because it is far more specific and grounded than the shorthand headlines suggest. The core of the senator's position rests on a simple foundational principle. The military operation against Iran was never legally authorized. It was not authorized by a formal declaration of war, the mechanism that the Constitution explicitly requires for the initiation of a state of armed conflict. It was not authorized by a specific authorization for the use of military force, the modern statutory vehicle that Congress has employed since the mid-20th century to sanction military engagements. Senator Markey's argument goes further. He contends that the War Powers Resolution, the 1973 law designed to serve as a check on presidential war-making, is an inadequate tool to address the current situation. The resolution was conceived as a mechanism to constrain wars that were already in progress or to force consultation after the initial commitment of forces. It was not designed, he argues, to serve as a retroactive justification for a war that a president simply decided to launch unilaterally without any meaningful prior consultation with the legislative branch. This is a legally precise and constitutionally serious argument. One may disagree with the ultimate conclusion that removal is the appropriate remedy, but the underlying claim about the violation of the constitutional order is not frivolous. Military force was deployed against a sovereign nation. Congress was not consulted in advance. The notifications required by the War Powers Resolution were delivered after the fact, treated as a bureaucratic formality rather than a genuine engagement with the people's representatives. And Senator Markey is asserting that this level of unilateral war-making, this concentration of the most awesome power of the state in the hands of a single individual acting on his own volition, is precisely the kind of constitutional transgression that the impeachment and removal power was designed to address. Now, we must confront the stark political reality that complicates this removal demand. The mathematics of conviction in the United States Senate are brutal and unforgiving. The Constitution requires a two-thirds majority of the senators present to convict and remove a president. Assuming all 100 senators are seated and voting, that threshold is 67 votes. The Democratic caucus currently holds 47 seats. To reach 67, they would require 20 Republican senators to cross the aisle and vote to remove a president of their own party. Is that a realistic scenario in the immediate term? Almost certainly not. The political headwinds against such a mass defection are formidable, but to focus exclusively on the immediate vote count is to miss the strategic purpose of Senator Markey's statement. The value of his declaration is not solely tied to the final tally on a hypothetical conviction vote. Its value lies in its capacity to shift the frame of the debate. It alters the political conversation. It creates a new baseline for what is considered an acceptable position for a senator to hold. Every time a senator of Markey's stature goes on the record calling for removal, it becomes marginally more difficult for Republican senators in competitive states to simply dismiss the question. Every time that video clip is played on cable news or shared across social media platforms, the pressure on moderate Republicans to offer some form of accountability, even if short of full removal, increases. The statement serves as a permission slip. It tells other senators that this is a legitimate constitutional conversation to be having, and it raises the political cost for those who choose to remain entirely silent or reflexively defensive. This is not occurring in a vacuum. The dots must be connected. Representative Larson introduced 13 articles of impeachment. Then, 47 members of Congress signed a resignation letter, a group that included 16 Republicans. Then, Senator Markey and multiple other senators issued their calls for removal. Interwoven between these events are the public warnings from Republican committee chairmen Rogers and Wicker, who have explicitly threatened repercussions for the administration's stonewalling of congressional inquiries into the war strategy. And running beneath all of this is the ongoing unresolved situation with the ceasefire, which has failed to produce a stable or durable peace, and the relentless surge in fuel prices that is extracting a direct financial toll from American households. These are not separate, unrelated news items. They are all manifestations of the same underlying dynamic, a presidency that has overreached its constitutional authority and is now facing a multi-front institutional backlash. The pace of escalation witnessed in a single week, 47 signatures on one day, Senate removal demands the next, is a velocity that rarely reverses itself spontaneously. Once political actors have crossed the threshold into publicly demanding the removal of a sitting president, the incentive to retreat is minimal. The political damage from the base has already been absorbed. The die is cast. The only logical path forward is to press the advantage and see the process through to its conclusion. The invocation of the 25th Amendment by some senators adds another layer of complexity to this constitutional chess game. The 25th Amendment is a mechanism designed primarily primarily for scenarios of presidential incapacitation, a stroke, a coma, a severe cognitive decline that renders the president physically or mentally unable to perform the duties of the office. The senators who are raising it in the context of the Iran war are making a more expansive and legally aggressive argument. They are essentially contending that a president who makes a unilateral decision to launch a war in defiance of the Constitution and in the face of congressional opposition is demonstrating a form of inability to faithfully execute the office that falls within the amendment's ambit. This is not the mainstream interpretation of the 25th Amendment. Most constitutional scholars would argue that it is a poor fit for this situation, designed for medical emergencies rather than political or constitutional disputes. But the very fact that senators are reaching for this tool is itself a significant piece of information. It signals a profound desperation. It signals that these senators believe the standard political mechanisms, hearings, resolutions, public pressure, are moving too slowly and are proving inadequate to constrain an executive branch that is operating with a sense of impunity. They are reading the Constitution like a map, searching for any available route, any hidden passage, any emergency exit that might lead to a resolution. This is wild. This is a situation where the normal levers of power feel insufficient to the gravity of the moment. Let us also examine the posture of the White House, because the administration's response to this escalating crisis is a critical component of the overall picture. The consistent theme of the administration's response has been dismissal and defiance. There has been no substantive engagement with Senator Markey's constitutional arguments. There has been no detailed legal memorandum presented to the Senate explaining the statutory basis for the Iran operation in a manner that addresses the specific concerns raised. There has been no good faith effort to provide the briefings that committee chairmen Rogers and Wicker have demanded. Instead, the removal demands are characterized as partisan theater, as the predictable noise of a Democratic Party that has never accepted the legitimacy of the president's election. And to be sure, there is an element of political calculation driving the Democratic push. It would be naive to pretend otherwise. Democrats see the Iran war as a political liability for the Republican majority heading into the midterms, and they are seeking to exploit that liability to its fullest extent. But to dismiss the entire enterprise as mere partisan performance is a profound strategic miscalculation. When 16 Republicans sign a resignation letter, the partisan noise defense collapses. When Republican committee chairmen issue public threats, the witch hunt narrative loses its coherence. At a certain point, defiant dismissal stops projecting strength and begins projecting a dangerous disconnect from reality. It creates the perception of a president who is so locked into a posture of permanent attack that he is incapable of reading the room, incapable of adapting to changing political circumstances, and incapable of addressing legitimate concerns raised by members of his own coalition. That perception of a president who is rigid, unresponsive, and politically tone-deaf is one of the most corrosive and long-lasting images that can be generated within a party heading into a difficult election cycle. Let us distill this complex, multi-layered situation into a series of clear, actionable takeaways. First, the bipartisan composition of the resignation letter is the entire ballgame. Democrats calling for Trump's removal is not a newsworthy development in the same sense that Republicans joining that call is newsworthy. Democratic opposition to this administration is a constant, a background feature of the political landscape. It is fully priced into every political calculation. What is not priced in, what changes the fundamental architecture of the political environment, is Republican defection. 16 Republican members of Congress signed that letter. Republican committee chairmen threatened repercussions. Republican senators are now being forced to answer questions on camera about whether they support removal demands, and some of them are not offering the crisp, unequivocal no that they would have delivered without hesitation just months ago. That is the story. That is the fault line. The slow, painful, and highly consequential erosion of Republican unity around a war that is not going according to plan. Every percentage point of Republican disapproval that accretes around the Iran operation translates into a congressional seat placed at greater risk in the midterms. Every Republican member who creates distance from the White House is a preview of what the electoral map could look like if the situation does not improve. The resignation letter and the impeachment demands are distinct mechanisms with different political implications. Asking a president to resign is fundamentally a political and moral appeal. It is a statement that the individual in question has forfeited the legitimacy to continue governing. Impeachment is a constitutional process. The letter, with its 16 Republican signatures, is significant primarily as a political signal. It demonstrates that a bipartisan bloc of legislators has concluded that the case for the president's continued tenure is no longer tenable. This does not mean he will resign. Presidents in this position almost never do. But the letter changes the environment. It intensifies the pressure on Republicans who have not yet broken ranks. It makes the prospect of a Republican senator voting to convict in an impeachment trial marginally more conceivable. The constitutional clock is ticking in a way that most analysis overlooks. The Iran war is ongoing. The ceasefire is unstable. Every single day that the conflict persists without formal congressional authorization is another day that the war powers violation, in the legal view of the senators making this argument, is actively occurring. This is not an impeachment inquiry focused on a discrete past event, a single conversation or decision that is frozen in history. This is an impeachment argument focused on a continuing present-tense crisis. The political and economic pressure generated by the conflict, the fuel prices, the casualties, the international scrutiny, is not a fading memory. It is a daily lived reality. Every negative headline from the region provides fresh ammunition for Senator Markey and his allies. Every uptick in the price at the pump gives a swing district Republican another reason to inch away from the White House. The longer the war drags on without a clean resolution, the more organic momentum the impeachment argument accumulates. The midterm calculation is the invisible hand guiding much of this activity. Democrats are pushing removal hard because the Iran war is a political gift heading into the election. That is transparent. But the fact that political incentives align with constitutional concerns does not negate the validity of those concerns. The war powers issues are genuine. The unauthorized nature of the conflict is a matter of documented record. The congressional oversight stonewalling is a demonstrable fact. For Republican members, the question is not whether Democrats are acting out of partisan motivation. They are. The question is whether the underlying substance of the crisis is sufficiently grave that staying silent and remaining fully loyal to a president prosecuting an unpopular, unauthorized war is the right call for their own political survival. 16 of them have already answered that question with their signatures. Here's the bottom line. What transpired in that compressed window of time was not politics as usual. A bipartisan group of lawmakers signing a resignation letter is an extraordinary event. A senior senator going on the record to demand immediate removal is an extraordinary event. Multiple senators invoking the 25th Amendment in the context of a war is an extraordinary event. These are not routine occurrences. They are happening in rapid succession. And their significance lies not just in the individual headlines, but in what they collectively tell us about the trajectory of this presidency. We are not in a holding pattern. We are in a state of active, accelerating escalation. The demands are growing louder. The coalition of critics is expanding and becoming more bipartisan. The constitutional arguments are sharpening, and the underlying political environment, the economy, the fuel prices, the stalled diplomacy, is not improving in ways that would offer the administration a plausible off-ramp. The Senate possesses the power to remove a president. We are not currently near the required vote count, but we are in a place that would have been unimaginable a short time ago, a place where the conversation about removal is no longer confined to the fringes. It is happening on the floor of the Senate. Watch this space closely. The pressure is building, and the people who have put their names on the line are not walking those names back.